christiangeekcentral.com.
Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions, and here I'd like to share with you an article that we're borrowing from our friends at SPECULATIVE.com. E. Stephen Burnett is the author who wrote this and sent it my way with permission to share it on this channel. And this is a great article. It's called, "Why Isn't There More Christian Fantasy?" Burnett writes, "Recently someone asked in a Facebook group, why isn't there more Christian fantasy? In a few words, why don't more Christian publishers want to publish speculative or fantastical novels that explore magic and or new worlds? It's a common, simple question. I don't believe I've ever directly explored it here. So here are my answers expanded from my original Facebook reply. I know a little about the industry. At least I have seen some things mainly from the just short of being actually published in the industry side. I've been in orbit for a few years. I've done much advocacy for Christian fantastical stories at www.speculativefaith.com, where a team of fans/writers and I explore fantastical stories for God's glory. We've also put together the Spec Faith library of every fantastical Christian written novel we know about from any publisher. I think that's helped me give a perspective on what's available." And I want to add as a side note, that really is a fantastic resource over at speculativefaith.com, their library of all the different fantastical novels written out there from a Christian perspective. Fantastic resource at speculativefaith.com. Anyway, Burnett continues, "Here are a few points I've gathered and tend to harp on. Question: why isn't there more Christian fantasy? Answer 1, there has been, but it failed. I know many Christian editors and authors who did or do publish fantastical titles, such as supernatural, fantasy, sci-fi, and that effort went over like a dead drone, and not because the publishers were not willing, but because the readership did not respond. Without exception, the Christian fantastical titles I enjoyed in the 90s and 2000s are now out of print at their original publishers. Some, such as Oxygen and the Firebird series, ended up being republished by Marcher Lord Press, now known as Enclave, which is now an imprint of Gilead Publishing. Answer 2, there is, but you haven't heard of it. Some Christian authors who tried fantasy/sci-fi at larger publishers ended up jumping genres, or they moved into indie or self-publishing. In some Christian circles, this means even less opportunity for the ministry platforms a traditional publisher might afford. Even apart from that, you likely haven't heard of an author's self- or indie-published works. From here, it appears that a new author must be able to be a full-time author/marketer to work at making a living from being a full-time author/marketer. Catch-22? And 3, there is, but readers aren't there. This question is not about the writers/publishers not giving the supply. It's about readers and what they demand. I'm going to come back to that, I think, in my comments after this article. That's why I overtly push against the "why don't Christian publishers and writers do X" line. Fact is, Christian publishers and writers have done X, and readers did not respond. I've begun to wonder among some of the Christian fantasy circles I know whether some writers simply do not know of the many, many writers and publishers who have tried this and are therefore led to conclude, well, someone should try it, in reinventing the wheel. After I wrote this material, an editor with a Christian publishing house commented and wrote, "It's not that publishers haven't tried to publish speculative fiction before, but the Christian readers didn't respond to it. I actually have on my desk a fantasy trilogy that my publisher did in 2007. No one bought it, and it's out of print now. And while Christian publishers definitely should be more willing to take risks, Christian readers and Christian stores, even in the age of Amazon, it's actually amazing how much they influence what gets published, have often punished those who took risks. That's why we're stuck in a never-ending vortex of Amish romance and now coloring books." So here's the real question we ought to ask, Burnett continues. Question: why don't more Christians want more Christian fantastical stories? Our faith is supernatural, fantastical, even magical, he puts in quotes. It's about a divine/human hero, Jesus, come to slay the dragon of sin, save his church, punish evildoers, and redeem the whole world. Given all this awesome, why opt for another adjective romance novel? Answer 1, shallow theology and legalism. The notion goes we only need to read clean stories, if any, about realistic things. Answer 2, wrongful pragmatism. This notion goes the only books we need are about real life-like people and events and valuable things like family and evangelism. And even if we do get crazier, like with Frank Peretti or Left Behind, well, those are about biblical facts or events that could really happen. Answer 3, a flawed and unbiblical view of the purpose of human stories and culture. This notion goes, we only have stories and songs because of some deficiency, because of sin, e.g. to educate, evangelize, or entertain. But stories and songs serve no purpose as part of God-given humanity or God's command to make something of the world and thus glorify and imitate Him. What if we were to correct this flawed belief in ourselves and then others? What if we point to the holiness endorsing, God glorifying purpose of what stories and songs are really for? That's what I want to do, Burnett says. Challenge poor justifications for popular culture, e.g. human stories and songs. I want to explore biblical purposes for these things to help us glorify God and enjoy Him forever. If we do Inception on people with this idea, we'll have more reader demand for better and more fantastical stories. And then more Christian publishers will naturally respond because they are not just pastors/ministers who should do the right thing regardless of what customers want. They are businesses, and that's okay. Fantastic article. Article, excuse me, by E. Stephen Burnett, which you can read along with a bunch of other great articles at SPECULATIVEFaith.com. I usually don't want to put my thoughts on the end of these when I share these articles because I feel like these writers are much more eloquent than I am. But I want to echo and emphasize something that Burnett said in this article. That he mentioned that it's really about the readership, you know. And, you know, you and I might look at this and say, oh my gosh, but here I am, I totally want these kinds of stories, you know, but there's a lot of people around us who don't. And I'm of the opinion that a lot of this has to start with what we believe about fiction, what we believe about entertainment, what we believe about content that some might consider questionable, you know? And this goes for whether you're talking about, you know, fantasy or fiction with dark themes like really weird and strange sci-fi that's really, you know, maybe dark and depressing or, you know, deals with really morbid themes or something like that, you know. I think what we need to understand as believers is that we can actually interact with this stuff, and provided we understand what the truth is, and we're always filtering everything through the grid of Scripture, you know, just taking in ideas and thinking about fantastical ideas or new ideas or whatever, there's no harm in that. In fact, there can be wonderful benefits of exercising our minds and our imagination by interacting with content that is imaginative and speculative and asks questions. And I think that the solution here, I once said on the Spirit Light Underground podcast that I see the solution here as starting in the pulpits of the American church. And I don't mean like the American, I say America because that's where I'm from, that's where I'm at, you know. Not because I think, you know, the American pulpits will solve the problems of the world, but I think that the teaching in our pulpits has to be Bible-based. The more it's based in tradition, and the more it's based in this kind of vague idea of what Christian culture is and what it always has been and stuff like that, we got to keep coming back to the Bible and seeing the freedom through discernment that we have in day-to-day life because of what Scripture and what the truth tells us. So yeah, I do think that a lot of the responsibility falls on those that are teaching from the pulpits. We got to teach from the Bible. We've got to teach from the Bible. The more we teach from the Bible, the more we can enjoy all kinds of things that express all kinds of different ideas. But really, this may have to start with you and I. You know, this may have to start with you and I. Maybe if we're at a church, you know, that we're not sure where the teachers from the pulpit stand, have a conversation with them about what they think of sci-fi and fantasy and horror, and are these things okay? How should we interact with those things? And I think if you've got someone that's teaching from the pulpit that says those things are in and of themselves like bad or evil or harmful, then I think you got to be really careful. And I would just refer you to my recent video about whether or not Christians should play Doom, because there's two passages from Scripture that I always go back to myself and refer other people to. And I think that if your teacher from the pulpit is saying, no, those things are inherently bad, we want to stay away from those, I think that's an indication that they are not scripture focused enough in their teaching, and maybe they've missed some understanding on their own. And if they are receptive and open and have the understanding that, yeah, as long as we discern our way through these different ideas, that we encounter, we can enjoy and interact with all kinds of different fantastical ideas, then maybe it's worthwhile to have some teaching on that. Or maybe it's worthwhile to just plan some events at your church where believers can be hanging out together and maybe watching movies or playing games that some people might think, oh, this is weird, it's sci-fi, it's fantasy, or whatever. But I think as believers, we just got to learn to live together and play together and just talk about this stuff. Just talk about it. Anyway, those are my thoughts for now, as sloppy and off the cuff as they are. For much more coherent and eloquent thoughts on topics like these, again, go to speculativefaith.com. And once again, I want to thank E. Stephen Burnett for sharing that article with us.
christiangeekcentral.com